Hi there, I'm Carrie Dunn. I am here at the old burying ground in Framingham on Main Street in an old cemetery that houses 41 American Revolutionary War veterans, and we'll be hearing about one of them now, Peter Salem. So I'll introduce you to a little bit about Peter Salem, and we'll look at the marker at his gravesite here in Framingham. Thank you. So here's a portrait of Peter Salem, an African-American Revolutionary War soldier. This portrait is actually painted a number of years after his death. It's a modern artist, Walter Williams Jr., and it's based on research, but that gives us an image of who we're talking about here today. And I'll tell us a little bit more about Peter Salem while we look at his grave marker. So here's his grave marker, and we'll hear more about this specifically, right? But Peter Salem was a person who was born into enslavement in Framingham in 1750. He was owned by a local landowner and farmer, Jeremiah Belknap, who later sold him to Lawson Buckminster. Buckminster became a major in the Continental Army upon the breakout of the Revolutionary War, and gave Peter Salem his freedom so that he could enlist and serve in the Continental Army like many other African Americans at the time. About 10% of the American forces were African Americans, mostly freed slaves, right? Peter Salem had a very distinguished military service in the Revolutionary War. He participated with the Minutemen mustering from Framingham in the battle at Concord at the opening of the war in 1775. Most notably, he slayed British Major General Pitcairn at Bunker Hill. He is depicted, and quite famous because of this, in the artist John Trumbull's painting depicting the death of Colonial Forces General Warren at Bunker Hill. So we'll take a look at that painting right now. Give me a second here. So here's Trumbull's painting, and if we look in the right corner, that is Peter Salem. All right, back to more info about Peter Salem. After Bunker Hill, right, he served for another 4 years in the Continental Forces. He fought in the Battle of Saratoga and the Battle of Stony Point. After the war, he returned to Massachusetts, where he married, and he worked as a cane weaver until his death at age 66. He was buried in this cemetery, the old burying ground in Framingham, right, in 1816. But he was buried in an area of the cemetery without a proper marker. The monument is therefore more recent, right, and was erected some years after his death in 1882. It was paid for by the town of Framingham at a cost of $150. For some time after that point, a garrison of African American Civil War soldiers based in Boston would come out each year on Decoration Day, which is the precedent to what later became Memorial Day, and decorate his grave with wreaths, right? After they aged out of being able to do that, after a period of about 20 years, the town kept up that tradition for some time, right? And it would usually be an annual news story whenever Peter Salem's grave was decorated. Here's just one example that I'll show you of one of those news stories. Here we have an article from the turn of the century in the Boston Globe, right, depicting the monument we're looking at right here and giving a really nice history of the service of African American soldiers in the American Revolutionary War. So this is Carrie signing off. Thank you very much for learning a little bit about Peter Salem, right, a prominent African American serviceman of the Revolutionary War. a war hero, right, and a great example of the service of African American soldiers in all of our nation's wars. Thank you. Bye-bye.